This show is part of the RetroZap.com podcast network.
Our underground network is standing by at the drop zone to distribute.
The transmission is being jammed. Looks like the Empire came out to welcome us.
Attention, Rebel Convoy. This system is under Imperial control. Stand down or be destroyed.
What a surprise. It's Star Wars Sabers and Scoundrels.
Starships.
Carabast.
Yeah. Starships, Sabers, and Scoundrels. The Scoundrels Special Edition.
Greetings, Scoundrels. This is Dennis, and of course, I have the Dark Lord of the Shtick, Darthaxis, with me.
Hello.
Welcome back to another Scoundrels Special Edition. Tonight, we are covering Trials of the Darksaber. But first, what's new with you, Taxis?
Nothing much. Had some popcorn today. It's pretty good.
Riveting commentary, as always.
Thanks.
Okay. Well, hit the spoiler alert, because this is, of course, a spoiler-filled podcast from this point forward. And here's our episode summary. After the existence of the Darksaber was disclosed to Fenn Rau by Kanan, Sabine reluctantly agrees to learn how to wield the weapon so that she might unite her people and bring them into the rebel cause. However, a few days of training with Kanan and Ezra failed to bring about noticeable results. Finally, Hera confronts Kanan about his training methods. With Hera's help, Kanan has an epiphany that he needs to push Sabine harder by letting her use the Darksaber itself. However, it is only when he makes her confront her past that she breaks through her mental barrier and learns to confront the fears of her family and failures on Mandalore. The episode ends with Fenn Rau, Ezra, and Kanan pledging their support to her, regardless of what she decides. Okay, so that is a very simple summary of the episode. As usual, I'm going to throw it to you, Taxis, first. About what's your overall 60-second impression of this episode?
Wow, I love this episode. I didn't even notice that it didn't have any more major climactic combat scenes or any threatening appearance from the Empire or anything like that. It was almost like total introspection, of definitely of Sabine, right? Get a little bit of Kanan. In fact, I think everybody, well, except for Zeb, kind of gets in on the whole, how have we learned to grow aspect,
Right.
And I really love this. It was an engaging episode, and like I said, it wasn't it's not filler to me because it propelled the storyline. The entire episode was about propelling the storyline.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is definitely an important episode for many reasons. So the episode starts off with they're back at Chopper Base, and Sabine is monitoring Chopper as he moves some crates and some things around. I don't know if that's left over from the inventory from the Warhead episode that we just saw last week. And then she notices Fenn Rau march up into the Ghost, and he goes into Kanan's room, where Kanan shows him the Darksaber. And Fenn Rau then explains the history of this weapon, that it was, what was his name? The Vizsla
Tar Vizsla, wasn't it?
Tar Vizsla, yeah. It was the first Jedi inducted, or the first Mandalorian inducted into the Jedi Order, and he crafted that weapon. After he died, it was left there in the Jedi Temple until the Mandalorians from Clan Vizsla, or House Vizsla, snuck in there and took it, and it became an important symbol for the Mandalorians. They used it to control House or Clan Vizsla, I can't remember. But then United, and the United. Well, I know they have houses and clans. Because Ren is, I think, a.
That's her house. I would say Vizsla's the clan, and Ren is House Ren, right?
Yeah. Should have looked this up before we started recording. But anyway,
if we were pros, we'd be doing stuff.
Exactly, and so that was pretty cool. This is an important one. I mean, in many ways, it's like Excalibur. Whoever has this sword, this saber, has a lot of influence, and it commands respect. It commands attention. We knew it was important because we've seen it in Clone Wars. Darth Maul took it, and with it, he had control over Mandalore. And then, we've seen it earlier in this season The Voices and Visions episode, that's where they retrieved it from Maul, from his cave on Dathomir. So this weapon has quite the history.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool how when Fenn was telling the story, it went to the sort of shadow storytelling,
Yes.
And I was thinking, well, beyond the whole, revelation that, there was actually a Mandalore that became a Jedi, or a Mandalorian that became a Jedi, and was it, the Mandalore? I don't know. I was thinking about when they snuck in and stole it. That reminded me of the opening cinematic to the whole, the Old Republic game.
I'm drawing a blank on that.
You remember where the attack on the Jedi Temple?
Oh, that one. Okay.
And there was, in there was a Mandalorian that was helping the Sith with the attack.
Well, that was a bounty hunter. I don't know that you could call that a Mandalorian. I don't know for certain you call that a Mandalorian, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
That character certainly did help sabotage the Jedi in their fight against the Sith.
So I was wondering if there'd be a story sort of similar to that. You know what I mean? Like that.
Maybe. I thought he said that they snuck in and took it. I didn't take it. It was as an assault on the Jedi Temple.
Right.
And then we'll get to later.
You say liberated it, I think.
Yeah. Well, Kanan makes sure to point out that the Jedi won the war against the Mandalorians at some point. So that is no small detail. That at some point there was a Jedi Mandalorian war in the past that the Jedi won. But we'll get to that in a second. But before we leave this topic of that story, Vizsla's saber, the method of that of the shadows, of Fenn Rau's shadow turning into the animation of that story, reminded me a bit of what is his name, Gendy Tartakovsky, who did that original Clone Wars stories, those shorts. When Anakin has that ritual right before that series ended, where the leeches crawl over his body and leave those blue markings. There is that vision he has where it showed basically kind of his future, and there was that image of Darth Vader. I don't know. It's not exactly the same thing, but anyways, it brought that to mind, and that was certainly unique. Yeah. They haven't done anything like that in Rebels so far.
No, and I vaguely remember what you're talking about. I seem to remember that, but I thought that was they haven't done anything like this in Rebels, and I thought it was a cool touch. It was like a way of showing the story without doing like a flashback.
Well, they were confronted with doing some exposition there about the past, and instead of just showing Fenn Rau talking for 1 or 2 minutes, they gave us some imagery without resorting to an actual flashback. So that was a neat narrative trick
that they really pulled off. Yeah, good job. Yeah.
So after that, Kanan, they
have an intervention.
I would say Kanan, Ezra, Hera, and the rest of them all have an intervention with Sabine. She knows it's coming. She's sitting on her bunk. She's not happy. Chopper shows up and summons her to this meeting. They have an intervention, and eventually it's Hera's words that get to her. Yeah. Hera says, I wouldn't ask this of you, but it would be very important. It would be a big help to the rebellion if you could bring the Mandalorians into the rebellion so they could help with our assault on Lothal. So that's another element to this. This assault on Lothal has been in the works for several episodes now. Mm-hmm. The episode An Inside Man was their reconnaissance of Lothal, and then they were planning another reconnaissance mission to that. I think the training mission that was in the Warhead episode had to do with this assault on Lothal that's coming up. I am beginning to think the assault on Lothal is going to be the season finale for season 3.
Still not sure what the strategic importance of it all is. I have a feeling they'll reveal that in due time.
Well, they're making the TIE Defenders there. That's that's what they stole. That's the intel that they stole from that factory. That's right. Back in that episode, and they know they need to destroy. I don't think they're. I don't know how many TIE Defenders are going to get produced. But because we've seen the mid-season trailer where there's at least one flying around, or a couple flying around anyway. So, I think beyond destroying the Empire's capability to make those things, I think it is it's probably enact to relieve Lothal some from that, because they've got a lot of Star Destroyers. That world is occupied, and is essentially under an embargo. The Empire he's got that planet under lock and key.
I thought it was kind of funny. Sometimes I can understand Chopper, and I swear when she says, well, who else there? Well, pretty much everyone, That's almost what it sounded like. And then when she walks by, she kind of pets him on his head, and he purrs. Or something.
Well, okay, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one of the points I want to talk about with Sabine. She makes clear to everybody else in the crew of the Ghost during that intervention that she doesn't need her old family because she's got a new one.
Right.
And it is the crew of the Ghost. And if you remember on the Ghost of Geonosis episode, after she's done her thing with the jetpack, when she took out the rocket troopers, and then when she lands back on the Ghost, and Ezra makes that comment about how he wants one of those jetpacks, she affectionately pats him on the arm. She, I think almost more than anybody on the crew, at least over the past few episodes, has really been displaying some familial affection for everybody else. And I think they've done a good job laying the groundwork for that. A pat that you would give someone on the shoulder that you wouldn't give a friend, that you would give a brother or a sister or a parent, a child, just those type of, that caress that she gave Chopper was, that was, kind of what you would give to a child or a pet.
Right.
So, that's, I hadn't really noticed that as much until she made a big deal about the crew of the Ghost being her family.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I almost feel like everybody else has been kind of separating more as characters. Yeah, everybody's kind of, like Hera's taking command. So with that, I think there comes a little bit of separation, like healthy borders that you have to put up, Kanan, I don't know. It's just, he doesn't feel as, especially in this episode, and maybe I'm just having my memory tainted from this, because in this episode, he was really kind of hard master, he was really kind of on edge,
Okay, well, let me ask you, do you think it's really so much that they're separating, or that the stories this season have frequently caused them all to split up to do things?
That could be it.
Because an inside man, had Ezra and Kanan doing this reconnaissance mission, and it didn't rely on everybody so much. Ghost of Geonosis featured the entire crew, but they had to split up. Hera stayed back at the ship. Sabine and Zeb went after the shield generator, and Ezra and Kanan went with Rex down into the catacombs on Geonosis to find Saw. And then Visions and Voices, they couldn't have the whole crew going after Maul. Hera was needed elsewhere for command, but Sabine, Kanan, and Ezra, had to deal with that. So I'm wondering if that's more because of the stories they're telling than necessarily they've been just going their own ways.
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess it could feel like that because of that. But, and like I said, it just kind of feels a little more, it feels less cohesive. You know what I mean? Like, even the way Kanan's kind of treating Ezra in this episode's a little more standoffish,
Okay, well, you brought up Kanan twice now, so let's get into him a little bit. One of the first things that this episode reminded me of is that there has been a number of Sabine and Kanan moments this season. He brought her with him when they went after Ezra to Dathomir. And, that's the episode that we talked with John Marie Macias with. And then, on this one, he basically adopted her as a student again. And then he used Ezra in her training. He had Ezra put her through the paces on the initial forms, on the initial techniques.
Yeah, I thought that was
train that Darksaber. So that's an aspect I've liked about this season. This Kanan and Sabine relationship. It's they haven't really highlighted that so much over the previous two seasons.
No, and there's something there because like when he says to Hera, well, wait, was it he that said that or she that said it to him? You remember how long it took for her to trust us,
She mentioned that. Hera mentioned that.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So it's almost like there's a, I wonder if she's the first one that they came across as far as recruitment.
Yeah, I don't know. I've been kind of hoping for that, whether it's in Rebels or another comic book series, miniseries or whatever.
Yeah.
A book or something. I'd love John Jackson Miller to get to write a sequel to A New Dawn, where it's, we know that at that point, even though he didn't show up in the book, or did he? Chopper was already with Hera at that point. So, she always had him. That goes way back to the days on Ryloth. I'd love to see how Sabine and Zeb came to be part of that crew, because we know the story of how Ezra did it, because that was the premiere of this entire series.
Yeah, that's a good point. That would be a cool story.
Yeah, so I'd love to see those. I mean, it couldn't even be the same novel for all that, for that matter. But
sure.
But regardless, so there's a trust issue there, and we get to learn a lot about that from Sabine's perspective. And so I'm going to skip over a few details just to get everyone back up to speed. Okay. So they go out to the middle of nowhere to do the training. Ezra, Kanan kind of tests her a bit, with some wooden practice sabers. It does not go well for Sabine, so Kanan turns her training over to Ezra for a bit to work on the initial forms. After a while, she gets frustrated and storms off. And then Kanan and Hera have a heart-to-heart about where things are going with the training. And then Ezra and Sabine, Ezra chases after her, and they kind of talk about how difficult this is for her frustrations with her family. It's something that she doesn't want to talk about, even though she is talking about it.
Right.
And then she returns. And so...
Which, by the way, during that conversation, my daughter and I were watching it. We both had a lot of ooh moments.
Which conversation?
With Ezra and Sabine. And, where he's like, at least you have a family to go back to. Ooh. And then a little bit later we're even right before then when she complains about Kanan, I can't remember what it was, but basically, how would you ever learn with such a crummy master? Ooh,
Yeah,
everybody's just, they're just going back and forth.
Yeah, I'm conflicted about that.
Everybody's touchy.
Well, okay, here's the thing. We know Sabine is in her late teens,
right?
In this series, and we're 3 years into it, so she's probably 18 or so, thereabouts. That's that. On that one hand, that line expressed some frustration. Kanan mentions to Hera that she's incredibly stubborn. She's a Mandalorian, and stubbornness is a feature of Mandalorians. Right. But
expressive,
that
seemed constructed or something. Yeah.
Yeah. She's got, she's very imaginative. She's got an artistic talent, but at the same time, she's stubborn and she's holding these things back, which is just a personality conflict. But, that line was, she's frustrated. She's got a past that she's having a hard time working out. I don't know, that line almost seemed a bit immature for her. I mean, it really drives home how frustrated she was for her to resort to that.
Little regression,
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But if I had a complaint about this episode, I think it's that line. So anyway, so she returns, getting back to my original point. So she returns to the campsite, and Kanan's been meditating, and he's prepared to finally let her start practicing with the Darksaber. And so they do. She picks up the Darksaber, he picks up his lightsaber, and they begin to spar. And he keeps picking up the pace. And they've said their apologies to each other, and they're clashing. And then finally, he kind of lets her have it. He says, you're making this too easy for me. As he tosses her to the ground. And then he challenges her. It's like, you've already given up. And she's, I never quit. And he says, well, that's exactly what it looks like. And he's continuing to basically toss her around during that sparring. And then
it doesn't even use a saber. He's just like open-handed.
Yeah, he turned it off.
Yeah,
he turned his saber off at one point, and which I appreciated. That this episode also reminds us, that he is the superior Jedi. He is the superior hand-to-hand combat member of the Ghost. Yeah, which isn't always apparent lately. But moving on. So then he then challenges when she says she's not a quitter. It's like, well, that's what your family thinks. That's what everyone in Mandalore thinks. She goes, lies is her response.
Again, another ooh moment.
That wasn't my response so much as it was just like, Tia Sakar.
You know what he's doing.
Well, Tia Sakar did a phenomenal job
Oh, yeah.
acting on her voice work on this episode was just second to none. I had an opportunity to watch the Rebels Recon, and she remarked how Dave Filoni doesn't normally give them all their sheets and their lines far in advance. He coaches them up while they're recording, and it's much closer to time, but he really let her have a lot of background information well in advance, so she could let that sink in.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
they could really work up this performance. And so she got a lot of coaching, and it really came out. I mean, she got emotional in a way that Sabine never gets on this show.
I actually, and I think you hit it on the head, Dennis. I mean, I felt the emotion come through her voice. If I was watching something live action, I think I'd be cued in more to physical characteristics to convey the emotion,
Right.
Which is hard to do when in this medium. So yeah, you're right. I mean, her voice did really make me feel sad,
Well, and not only that, Filoni remarked in Rebels Recon that normally they do all the animation first and then record the lines. Well, on this episode, they recorded all the dialogue first, then did the animation, and his thought was that they, if they had to, they'd go back and re-record it. Well, they didn't do it because the performance that they turned in was so phenomenal for this one.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect. It's they did such a great job with the acting on this episode, with the voice work. Everybody did. Taylor Gray as Ezra did. Freddie Prinze Jr. did a great job with Kanan. I don't know who does Fenn Rau off the top of my head, but that was a good performance.
Oh, it's somebody awesome. I can't remember. Right. By the way, Ezra. Okay, and don't lose your point, but I just want to say, because of this whole thing, I thought Ezra's character during this whole episode was a good counterpoint to Kanan. Because Kanan was being so kind of hard and driven, and Ezra is just kind of relaxing. You know what I mean? Like he's the soft side.
Yeah. Well, let's get to Ezra in a minute. I want to finish up the conversation on Sabine here, which was, she has this outpouring of emotion as she finally reveals to the audience, and I think to Kanan at this point. I'm not sure that Kanan knew the entire story. I mean, he had some idea because he knew just the right buttons to press. Yeah. But she says that she didn't quit on her family. She did, everything she did was for her family. For her mother, for her father, for her brother, which is the first time I'd heard of a brother. Yeah. And then, so she designed some weapon with the Empire, only to have the Empire turn around and use it on the Mandalorians, and to essentially, as she put it, enslave Mandalore, to enslave her world.
Now that was a big reveal.
Yeah. Right. And so when she tried to stand up and speak out against it, her family didn't back her up. They sided with the Empire. Ooh. Which, man, you want to talk about a deep cut there. She did something. She was trying to make up for it, and the people that she counted on the most turned their back on her. I can see why she has those trust issues, which have been an element to the story in the past. That back in season 1, was it when they went to that asteroid with the Fear Nox? They had Hera and Sabine worked out that trust issue that they had back then. But hey, doesn't come easy for her given her background. We had no idea what it was about then, and they've teased it for 2.5 seasons, and we finally get the story now.
Man, I wonder what the weapon was.
Well, isn't that beautiful that, despite all these big reveals, they just set up a whole bunch more mysteries?
Yeah, I know. It's like, it had to be pretty kick butt,
Yeah. I mean, this kind of reminded me of the blog our friend Michael O'Connor wrote on RetroZap, where, back with the original trilogy, Star Wars just gave you mysteries, and it puts you in the story, without, in the middle of the story, and then, you used your imagination to fill in the blanks. Well, I kind of feel like that's where we're at right now. So if you haven't had an opportunity to read his article, head over to RetroZap and check that out. So, okay, back to Ezra. So we've kind of covered Sabine. So, what was it you were saying about Ezra there?
Well, I really liked how he was kind of, if Kanan was playing the hard master, Ezra was playing the soft master. And I'm sure you recognize when Kanan asks him to work on the forms, that almost reminded me of a master dojo asking one of his students to teach the new students how to do things,
Yeah, I see this a lot with my kids at martial arts.
Yeah.
Some of the older students get paired up with the inexperienced ones to help them learn something new.
And, that says a lot for Sabine, because she's got to take instruction from someone who's younger than she is, and... and Ezra loved that. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Little brother finally gets to take the older, the mentor role with big sister, which is never happened.
Right. Him. And I think he was being very easy going with her. He wasn't goading her like Kanan was. He was playing with her. He was having fun. Well,
he certainly did love winning when they were sparring.
Oh yeah, he did. Which, okay, if I may, we forgot one thing that I think was really cool and a critical element to this. Fenn Rau comes to visit the camp and bring supplies.
Yes.
Right?
And we didn't forget.
Okay, good. Are you ready to talk about this? Because
go ahead.
Okay,
yeah, so that's part of the whole Ezra Sabine dynamic in this episode.
So, and Fenn brings Sabine something from her homeworld, and they're Mandalorian vambraces. Those things that go over your forearms.
Yes.
Sort of like, for anybody out there, I'm sure they know what we're talking about, but sort of like what Boba Fett had.
I didn't realize they were braces. I always thought they were some sort of a gauntlet, when they were on Boba Fett. But right, they're braces.
Now, I think this is interesting because, Fenn presents them to her. She's like, well, where'd you get these? And he doesn't even answer that. He's just like, just try them on, And they have some sort of paralyzation dart, which be careful with that. And then a grappling ray thing. And then a repulsor, which was cool. And he says that these were developed by the Mandalorians to fight the abilities of the Jedi, which, again, way cool, right? Now, to me, I think that this was critical to Sabine accepting who she is. Because at this point, she hasn't yet received, or Kanan hasn't said, here, this is your Darksaber, take it, right?
Right.
And she's been reluctant to take it, But Fenn giving her this extra bit of armor, and especially given the martial history that he kind of gives her behind it, I feel like that was like a stepping stone for her to ultimately accept her responsibility, her position as a Mandalorian,
Okay, a couple points about that. When it comes to the Darksaber, she didn't want it because, as Fenn Rau recognized at the beginning, she didn't want the responsibility that came with it. If she takes that Darksaber and she goes back to Mandalore, she has to confront her family, who we've just learned the story about, that, how they betrayed her, they let her down.
Right.
And two, she pointed out, she goes, I know how to fight. I know how to use blasters. I knew how to use swords. I knew how to use bombs and things like that. So, this Darksaber is just something that wasn't particularly interesting for her. It was, it brought her back into her past. As for those bracers, I kind of looked at those as, while she had those, she didn't really have to go with Kanan's teaching on those. She didn't. She didn't really have to know how to use the Darksaber so much while she had that. I mean, she's been all about the tech this season. Yeah. She got her new jetpack. Now she's got these bracers that, give her all kinds of toys.
She's a Mandalorian armor completionist.
Right. Back in, I think it was episode 7 where we covered Celebration Europe. And, they had the Rebels panel. And Tia Sakar and Sam Witwer were the only 2 cast members that were part of that panel with Dave Filoni. And Tia remarked how Sabine was going to get a collection of new technology over the course of this season.
Cool.
And for the most part, so it was the jetpack early on, which then disappeared for several episodes before it reemerged on the Ghost of Geonosis. Well, yeah, but at the same point, it was like, that was a highlight of that panel, was her talking about there was new technology which she couldn't reveal. Well, the only thing we saw was a jetpack that broke down after one episode.
Yeah.
And then, finally reemerged. But now she's got some more stuff. And so she's got a jetpack, she's got the bracers, and now she's got the Darksaber. I mean, she is kitted out.
Oh, yeah.
She's armed for bear now.
She just needs like a shoe that has a little knife that sticks out of it, like that villainess and From Russia with Love.
Yes.
Then she'd be totally complete. Vibroblade shoe. Why is your shoe buzzing? No reason. Yeah, that is so cool too. And one of the things I really liked about this, I loved the Darksaber effect. When they were moving it. It wasn't like a lightsaber. Lightsabers are very pinpoint, very, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's almost like the Darksaber kind of left a swath of darkness behind it as it moved. It was very odd. And beyond that, we had a big reveal, about the interaction of, a being with a kyber infused blade, right?
Yes.
What was it how did Kanan describe it? Because she starts out, it's heavy to her. Yeah. Right. And, he points out it's not entirely a new concept, because we've always heard about how the lightsaber is an extension of the Jedi. Right. We've heard Qui-Gon telling Obi-Wan that, this weapon is your life. And then Obi-Wan repeats that to Anakin in Attack of the Clones. So, we've always kind of heard this. So there's this connection between the Jedi and the Kyber crystal, and Kanan reinforces that the energy of your thoughts, the energy of your actions flows from you into this weapon, into the Kyber crystal, and out through the blade. And so as she used it and as she accepted it, it became not so heavy anymore, and it became lighter in her hand. She became swifter using that weapon, which is nice, because that goes back to an earlier part of this episode when Hera checks in with Kanan on how the training is going, and he's expressing his frustration. That goes back to that line we were saying where, she's stubborn. She's a stubborn Mandalorian. Mm-hmm. And then, Hera is starting to call him out a little bit, because they start off with those wooden training sabers, and Hera points out, well, I don't remember using wooden training sticks with Ezra. And Kanan points out, well, that was different. And, Hera's, not buying it because, well, how is it different? And Kanan points out, well, Ezra's so eager to learn, and Sabine's been holding back. She hasn't been, she didn't want to do this in the first place, and she's not excited about learning now. And then, then Hera, challenges him further. Well, is this because she can't use the Force? And he points out something that we've kind of come to learn and appreciate more with Rogue One's release, which is everyone can use the Force. This is a Catalyst notion from the Catalyst novel. This is a notion that we get with Chirrut Îmwe in Rogue One, that everyone can use the Force. Not everyone can use the Force. Everyone has the Force. It resides in anyone, which, hey, even goes back to The Empire Strikes Back. Yoda points out that the Force exists between all living things. It's a field generated by all living things. It exists between, you, me, the lizard, the rock, the swamp, everything. And so, he quickly shuts that down. The Force is with her. The Force is with everybody. But she is just so reluctant to accept what's going on that, he's taking it back a step. He thinks that, she needs to work up to the Darksaber, that she's afraid of it. And then if he plunges that responsibility on her, then, that'll be ruinous. That'll shut everything down. Mm-hmm. Hera turns the table on him. This was a great moment for Hera. I feel like, she had an episode earlier in this season, Hera's Heroes, where, that was about her and Cham and their family and everything like that. But she hasn't had as big a role this season. But this episode made good use of her. Yes. Because, she's... she and Kanan are co-leaders of this group. They both lead in different ways. They push this group at different moments and at different times for different purposes. Mm-hmm. And she helped him get through this block that he was having. He could not figure out how to finally get through to Sabine and overcome this hurdle that she was having with her training. And he said, she told him, as long, she's got trust issues, she's got issues. You remember how, as you brought up earlier,
how hard it was for her to trust us when she joined this group.
Right.
Then and as long as you're using those wooden sabers, as long as you're keeping that Darksaber for her, you're supporting her reluctance to adopt this destiny.
Right.
That's not her words. So I'm putting words in her mouth. And so he goes along with it.
Mm-hmm.
And when she finally returns to the camp towards that end of the episode, he thrusts the Darksaber into her hands and makes her accept that role.
And that made me tense, seeing that whole training sequence with the actual saber, and when she accidentally cut one of her van braces,
Yes. Yeah.
I was like,
when she fell down. Right.
Like, ooh, what, because I mean, it's like you lose it. There's no plan. You lose a finger, if you're not careful. But okay, one more thing. Stupid rock. Ooh, I am the Bendu. Why did you wake me? Huh? I have a feeling we'll see a reason for that later. Like, maybe
I'm wondering.
Maybe he talks to her at some point.
Well, do you think that's what we're going to see next on this storyline, or are they going to head off to Mandalore next? I mean, how much more time are they going to spend training Sabine? I kind of think that they need to move the story along. I don't think we need to see Sabine finally mastering this weapon at this point. The story needs to move along. Anything, unless there's some other hurdle with her training that wasn't addressed in this episode, I think they're ready for the story to move on. So I would not be surprised to see the Bendu reference this in the beginning again sometime this season. But I kind of think it is. I think it's going to be an issue with Kanan. Because the Bendu has interacted with Ezra, and it's now seen Sabine and her frustration. But the Bendu is more of a mentor for Kanan than anybody.
Yeah.
And I can't help but wonder. I can't help but think this is going to be a, something that he's noticed, in Kanan's development in this episode.
Yeah, because I was about to say maybe it was Ezra that piqued his interest somehow. The way he was reacting to the whole thing.
It could have been, but I don't know. I kind of felt like that glance was for Sabine. I don't know. The timing of it makes me think the glance was for Sabine. He knows that, Bendu knows Ezra. Ezra knows the Bendu. I don't know what, if anything, Kanan and Ezra have told the rest of the crew about the Bendu.
Yeah, that just seemed very odd.
Yeah, it definitely was.
Very, very. I'm here and heard everything.
It's really what I've noticed from our conversation here is it's very hard to talk about this episode in a linear fashion.
Wow, I know.
All parts of it, every scene has a significant impact on the scenes that became before and after in this episode.
Yeah.
One last thing before we need to move along on this, but did you notice the owls?
Yes, 3 owls.
Yeah, they flew in for this. That's
some significance to the Force.
Dave Filoni wrote this up. Dave Filoni wrote this episode, and so anytime that he's involved, you're typically going to, the chances of seeing those owls increases. But
wait, who wrote this episode?
Dave Filoni.
Who?
Why do you want me to repeat this?
Sorry, it's owl humor.
Okay. Great. So back to my point. He doesn't just throw those owls in for no reason.
Right.
They have a very specific meaning for him. They go back to the sister from the Mortis trilogy. And then they were tied to Ahsoka.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know that I have the patience to sit here and figure this out at this point, because we're dealing with some imperfect information. But
from
what
I remember of owl lore, and I seem to remember that they signify a transition between two worlds. Whether it be spiritual or in a figurative sense. And maybe that's what we're seeing. This is Sabine's transition into her new world, which is taking up the mantle of leadership for the Mandalorians.
Right.
Yeah. Going back to face her fears. I don't know, but it was weird that there were 3 of them, not just one. But she does have the owl on her pauldron, if you notice. You pointed out a long time ago. So, yeah, there's some purpose to that. There's some symbolism to it. Not quite sure yet. But,
I have a feeling that's coming at some point too. Someday that'll be all clear to us. I guess recently at an event, Ashley Eckstein has mentioned that Dave Filoni, I guess, has given her some more of an idea of that, what Ahsoka's future will be, or when we might see her return. So, it was incredibly vague. So that's what we know. But there seems to be something in the works there. I don't know any more about it. But
who
there you go.
Will be affected? We don't know.
Ha ha ha. Okay. Well, I have a surprise for you.
Oh, really?
A little bit of a bonus.
Oh.
Have any idea what it might be?
Silence Fools.
You want to try that again?
Oh, yeah. Okay. me. Silence Fools. Very good. Thank you.
Okay. Well, this is from our friend Jay Krebs. She wrote into us last week about the Warhead episode, and due to oversight on my part, we weren't able to work it into episode 20, so we're going to talk about it here. But this is her thoughts on Warhead, which of course was the infiltrator droid at Chopper Base that Zeb, Chopper, and AP5 had to fight off. So she says, wow, what a great episode. A quick few thoughts. I've already been seeing the label filler being placed on this one, but my opinion is anything but. We get to see Callus in his role as Fulcrum, which was super cool to me, especially the little smirk we see when the Imperial Star Destroyer explodes. I love that the banter between Zeb, Chopper, and AP5, and I adored the Chopper-dutted line, I have a bad feeling about this. I also thought the freezing ability Chopper demonstrated was sweet. He's a smart little dude. So cool to see the Ralph McCoy tribute and the Recon droid come to life, and I really like the idea of Thrawn using them on the down low, against the permission of the Empire, to forward his personal agenda. The Recon droid did remind me a little of K2SO, and that was affirmed by Dame Filoni in Rebels Recon, which we covered last time. However, I'm glad the McCoy reference was able to be utilized. As far as character growth for Zeb, nothing really struck me, except perhaps for his ability to problem solve under pressure. Overall, fun episode. Thanks for the opportunity to share my thoughts. May the Force be with you always, Jay Krebs. So, yeah that was a nice summary email from Jay. Some great thoughts there. I think we discussed most of this stuff last week. So good to know that we have someone double checking for us.
Yeah, that was fun. And it was, I agree with her. I don't think it was so much filler. I think it did progress. And one of the things she said that I really didn't, kind of glossed over last week, but now that I'm thinking about it, do we have any doubt that Callus is 100% against the Empire? I mean,
you know what? I still have this nagging thought at the back of my mind that there might be something else going on there. And maybe it is because I'm confusing the purity of his intentions with, perhaps that Thrawn knows that he's Fulcrum and maybe deliberately setting him up to help draw out the rebels.
Right.
And that's the beauty of a character like Thrawn, is that it could be anything. I mean, maybe Thrawn doesn't realize, maybe he does, and he's, because he kind of, the end of that Inside Man episode, he kind of had the way he said some things to Callus about, knowing there was a rebel in their midst and drawing the guy out.
Yeah.
It suggested that maybe he knew what was going on, or perhaps that was just him being, we'll use this rebel spy to our advantage, not, trying to bring Callus into his confidence. It's hard to say.
I think he suspects. I mean, I think Thrawn suspects, but the reason being is because I don't know if they would have shown us Callus giving a little smirk of, you rebels blew up an entire Star Destroyer, killing 12,000 people.
yeah.
You know what I mean? I think he would have been a little more naturally shocked. Maybe I'm reading too much into it, but if he was, I don't know. I just think that his intentions are completely honorable in this at that point. Yeah. But
I think we're going to be a few episodes before we find the answer to that one out.
Yeah.
But I think we're going to be spending some time with the Mandalorians for a little bit, maybe for at least another episode or two. Yeah. All right. Well, let's turn our attention back to the Trials of the Darksaber here for a second. Why don't you give me your concluding thoughts on that? And if you want to go ahead and grade it, do that as well.
I think some people might underrate this episode incorrectly. I think this episode did more to tantalize and compel us to get excited for what's coming up next. There's definitely something big in the works here. I'll tell you, man, at the very end, when Fenn Rau kneels before her, you know, I mean, she's royalty. She's become royalty almost with this. And I'm just excited to see what they do with it. You know, finally we're getting some beefy Mando story, you know? And and I'm going to give this I'm really giving this a high mark. I'm really giving this like a 98. I really loved it, and I think it's one of my favorite episodes. You know?
Yeah, I mentioned my only slight complaint, which was Hera's response to Kanan when she got frustrated. But other than that, I absolutely love this episode. It was superb writing by Dave Filoni. It was extremely well performed with the voice acting, especially TSR as Sabine. She did a phenomenal job with this. It made good use, I think, of the entire crew, with the exception of Zeb, who basically had a cameo role in the beginning, and I guess Chopper for that part as well. So, you know, there's very little. It is a setup episode for what's going to happen on Mandalore, and we're going to finally meet Sabine's mother. You know, that we've seen that coming from the mid-season trailer and from other things that they've revealed. But beyond that, it was a self-contained episode because it told the story of basically Sabine overcoming a past hardship.
Yeah.
So I don't know that I'm going to give it a numerical grade, but it is a solid A to A+. I'm with you. This is one of my favorite episodes of the season. I put this right up there with An Inside Man and Visions of Voices as a couple of my favorite episodes from this year. So well done, Dave Filoni and crew. So kudos to them.
Mazel tov.
All right. Yeah. Well, that's going to do it for this Scoundrel Special Edition. If you want to reach us on social media, we are SCubedPod on Twitter. Darthaxis is at Darthaxis, and I am at DJKVER2.
It's all true.
That's right. You can find us at Facebook at facebook.com/SCubedPod. We love getting your email, so please send us your rebel thoughts to SCubedPod@retrazap.com. And if you would like to support us, the best way we know how is to leave us an iTunes review. I'll really look forward to getting some more of those. Also, make sure to check out all their great shows on the RetroZap Podcast Network. I think lately, if you're at all interested in the new Destiny game that's came out recently, Trade Federation is a great show to check out for that. They've had a lot of good episodes on that. I was looking for a copy of that game when I was at the comic shop last weekend. Unfortunately, they were out.
Yeah, I'm kind of getting intrigued by it too.
Yeah, but those guys have had some interesting stories about their deck building and how they're acquiring their cards and playing that game. So I highly recommend Trade Federation for that.
Excellent.
So, So any final thoughts, Taxis?
You know, I'm pretty empty. But this was a great episode, man. I mean, it was just emotionally sucking out of me. You know what I mean? Just, man. And like I said, I think people might underestimate the power of this episode in the long run. You know, or in the short run, and we'll see exactly how important it was to the entire story in the long run. So, yeah, until next week.
All right, hashtag analysis.
Get your popcorn ready.
Thanks for listening, everyone. May the Force be with you. We'll catch you next time.